I always knew what was expected of me. It wasn't said outright, but it was conveyed in the long gazes during Sunday services, in my mother's firm hands adjusting my dress, in the almost solemn silence from my father whenever I dared ask something outside the script. From a young age, I learned to smile with restraint, keep my knees together, and lower my eyes when someone older spoke. As the pastor's daughter in a small town, where every street ends in gossip and every house knows the other's secrets, I wasn't just Abigail. I was the standard, the model, the one meant to be sweet without being weak, steadfast without being rebellious, God-fearing without ever questioning. For a long time I was exactly that. I read scriptures with devotion, sang in the choir, served lemonade at the ladies' meetings, and stayed silent every time my heart screamed for something I couldn't name. I told myself it was normal to feel that emptiness in the quiet moments, that the chill in my hands when I glimpsed the world spinning beyond the church's borders was just vanity trying to lead me astray. But there was a silent restlessness, growing year after year like a crooked root beneath a well-built house, and then, on a stifling Tuesday afternoon, he appeared. Not like in books, not breathtakingly handsome, not riding a white horse. He showed up dusty, with eyes weary from someone who'd seen enough to not be surprised by anything. But it was the way he looked at me, direct, without judgment, without weight, without expectation, that threw everything I thought I had under control into disarray. He didn't know who I was, and maybe because of that, he was the first person to truly see me. Noah. He said his name like someone who doesn't hold on to it, like someone just passing through, but something in me, something old and strange, knew before logic could interfere. This man carried the question I'd been trying to silence since I was a girl. And in that exact moment, a part of me refused to keep living asleep. There was no touch, no promise, no sweet words that first day. Just the unsettling feeling that the world, so meticulously aligned around me, had tilted a few degrees, and I was the only one who noticed. Noah spoke little. He asked for a glass of water in a low, drawling voice, like someone in no hurry to leave or stay. But there was something in his movements, in the way he looked around without fear or need to please, that left me uneasy. The kind of presence that doesn't impose itself but takes up space, like a truth no one wants to admit out loud. For days, I tried to convince myself it was just a strange moment, that the heat, the monotony, or some logical explanation had led me to see too much in someone who was just another drifter passing through. But he came back. He kept showing up on street corners, at the back tables of the diner in the shade of a park bench, always alone, always silent, but never invisible. And every time our eyes met, something in me stretched, like a rope pulled too tight, ready to snap or transform. I started looking for him without admitting it even to myself. I changed my route without thinking, linger longer than necessary. In certain places, pretend I didn't notice when he looked at me. But I noticed. Every cell in me knew. My whole body became someone else in his presence. Not like the forbidden romances the town loved to whisper about, but like someone who finally feels their blood running alive in their veins. At home, my father seemed to sense something. He didn't say anything, but the silences between us grew, longer. The sermons got harsher. The prayers carried a weight I couldn't tell was care or fear. My mother stayed on the surface, as she always did. Smiles that didn't reach her eyes, phrases that skirted the core. And I was starting to slip into a place where no written or sacred rule could reach me. Everything I'd been taught said this was the start of a fall, but everything I felt said it might just be the birth of truth. The mornings that followed had a strange taste, like I'd woken from a dream I wasn't ready to leave. I went through my routine with the same pressed clothes, the same church, commitments, the same controlled smiles. But inside, something had shifted. I listened to the sermon's words more closely, not to absorb them, but to search for gaps, spaces where what I was feeling might fit. But there were no spaces, no room for questions, for doubt, for a desire that didn't bear a holy name. And yet, it grew. Noah kept appearing without warning, as if he knew exactly where and when to be without seeming to seek me out. Sometimes he'd greet me with a slight nod, other times just with his eyes. There was a sadness in him, not self-pity, but a deep weariness, like someone carrying stories they'd rather not tell. And for that very reason, I wanted to know them all. One afternoon, our paths finally stopped crossing by chance. I saw him sitting under the shade of an old oak, reading something with his legs stretched out, the whole world seeming to fit in his solitude. I could have walked past, as I'd done so many times. But I stopped, and when he looked up at me, it was as if everything around us fell silent, as if there were only two strangers and an unspoken question between them. "Do you like to read?" he asked, simple, no pretense. I nodded, more with my body than with words. I sat beside him without thinking of the consequences, and in that small act, so far from what's expected of a pastor's daughter, I began to understand what freedom was. We talked for hours, and yet it felt like we'd barely begun. He didn't try to impress. He didn't measure his words. He spoke about the cities he'd passed through, the people he'd met, the odd jobs he'd done, all with a calm that made me forget time. When I realized the sky was darkening, I stood up in a rush, my heart racing with fear that I'd gone too far. But he just smiled and said, "Don't worry, you're still you." But I knew I wasn't anymore, and I never would be again. In the days that followed, I walked with the care of someone treading sacred ground, unsure if they're still welcome there. I didn't seek Noah out, but everything in me longed to find him, and he appeared as if time and space guided him to me, by the riverbank, near the old barn, or sitting outside the town's closed bookstore, always with that look that didn't judge, but didn't beg to stay either. Our conversations grew longer. Sometimes we talked about books, sometimes about silence. He told me short stories, almost emotionless, but heavy with truths only experience can teach. I listened with the focus of someone absorbing more than they hear. And though part of me feared where this bond was heading, there was also an ancient thirst being quenched for the first time. At home, the air began to shift. My father, Pastor Nathaniel, noticed. He didn't say it outright, but he started asking more questions. "You've been different, daughter. We've been praying less together, have you noticed?" My mother just watched. She always knew the biggest battles don't come from shouting, but from silences that stretch too long. The town felt it too. Eyes lingered on me longer. The church ladies watched me with keener interest. And when they saw my name scratched off the annual retreats planning list, they started whispering as if my absence signaled the end times. But nothing hit me harder than the silent guilt. I prayed alone at night, asking God to tell me what this was, to show me if it was love or damnation, an answer or a temptation. But he seemed silent, or maybe for the first time, he was teaching me to listen differently. Then it happened. My father called me into his office, not as a father, but as the church's authority. He said he'd heard rumors, said it wasn't proper for me to get involved with someone rootless, without testimony, without commitment to the faith. And finally, he looked me in the eyes and asked if it was true. My mouth opened, but no words came out, because everything I felt was too real to fit into simple answers. And in that moment, I realized I'd crossed a line I couldn't undo. I wasn't just the pastor's daughter anymore. I was Abigail. And for the first time in my life, That was stronger than any title others had given me. From that day on, something at home broke, and no one dared name it. My father grew more serious, quieter than usual, but with a gaze that weighed on me constantly. It wasn't anger, it was disappointment. The kind that comes from feeling betrayed, not by an act, but by a silent deviation from the script. My mother tried to keep her daily gestures as if nothing had changed. The coffee served at the same time, the tepid questions, the restrained affection. But even the sound of cutlery at the table felt different. Inside I was a battlefield. Guilt and liberation coexisted in me with an intensity that left me exhausted. At times I thought I was losing my mind, for wanting someone I barely knew, for feeling alive exactly when everything around me said I should feel ashamed. And still, I couldn't let go of it. Of the conversations with Noah, the looks that demanded no masks, the feeling that in this stranger there was something of mine the whole world had tried to hide from me. I started leaving the house at odd hours. I dodged questions, invented errands. I walked through town like someone fleeing without running. And somehow, I always found him. Noah never demanded my presence or explanations. He was just there. And that was the most unsettling thing. The fact that he didn't want to shape me, didn't expect me to be anything other than who I was when I was with him. For the first time, my existence didn't require effort. I didn't need to prove holiness, kindness, or usefulness. I just needed to be. One time, as we sat by the trail, he told me he never went back anywhere, that he'd tried to put down roots before, and every time, someone dug deep enough to tear them out. So he gave up. He said it without bitterness, like someone who accepts pain without fighting it anymore. But something in his eyes at that moment cut me deeper than any words ever had, because I recognized it, not the abandonment, but the surrender. That afternoon, I touched his hand for the first time. There was no intention, no promise, just the warmth of one skin meeting another with care, as if saying, I don't know what this is, but I'm here. And he didn't pull away, didn't hold tighter, just let it be. Like someone who knows that for some things there's no language, only presence. That night, I lay in bed with my eyes open, staring at the ceiling, as if it could give me answers the Bible hadn't. And for the first time, I prayed without asking for forgiveness. I just gave thanks, not for him, but for finally finding myself in someone else. The following Sunday, I sat in the front pew of the church as I had since childhood, but my body felt out of place. My father's words rose from the pulpit, filled the sanctuary, but didn't pierce me anymore. They were phrases I knew by heart, verses about obedience, purity, the dangers of straying from the path. And yet sitting there, eyes fixed on his voice, I felt further from him than I'd ever been, not out of rebellion, but because something in me had woken up, and it no longer fit the mold I'd been taught. After the service, as the ladies exchanged smiles and recipes at the church door, I felt the weight of new gazes, not the usual ones of silent approval, but gazes of doubt, the kind that say, she's changing, and they were right, I was. Every time Noah and I shared a moment without haste, I drifted further from the Abigail everyone expected me to be, and closer to the Abigail I never thought I'd be allowed to become. But the more I found him, the more I feared losing him. Noah was made of the road. He had the restless soul of someone who never learned to stay. I knew that, even if he never said it, and yet something in him began to slow down around me. The silences between us stopped being empty and became places of rest. He started asking about me, about the town, about what I wanted from life. And I answered everything, except the thing that hurt most to admit. I wanted him to stay. One afternoon, we walked to the field behind the old school. We sat in the grass, watching the sky lose its color slowly, and I listened as he talked about his absent father, his sick mother, the places where no one called him by name, only by the work he could do. And when he fell silent, he looked at me as if asking, "And you? Do you feel invisible too, in the midst of all this light?" And yes, I did. Like my shine only existed as long as it served to illuminate others. With him it was different. I shone for being me. Our first kiss happened there, unrehearsed. It was a calm, almost shy gesture, like we were touching something sacred. And for a moment, everything stilled. No church, no father, no town, no past, no fear. Just that moment. And he looked at me afterward with an expression I'll never forget, like he knew that kiss changed everything, and it did. Because the next day, he didn't show up, or the day after. And when I discreetly asked at the diner where he used to eat, they said he'd left early, backpack on, without leaving a note. My heart froze, but I didn't cry. I didn't chase him. I just went home, walked into my room, took off my shoes, and knelt on the cold floor. And for the first time, I spoke to God without the church's voice, without my father's echoes. I spoke as Abigail, just me, just him. And I asked, not for Noah to come back, but that if what we had was love, he'd know, wherever he was, that it was real. The days that followed were strangely quiet. Noah had become so naturally part of my routine that his absence ached like something had been torn from inside me, leaving no trace. I went through my tasks as always, smiled in the right places, answered the congregation's greetings, read my holy passages with a steady voice. But inside, I was split between two worlds, the one I still represented for others, and the one I discovered within myself. I passed the places we used to meet, like someone revisiting a memory too precious to erase. And in every corner, every wooden bench, every lone tree, there was a silence that reminded me he'd been there, but he wasn't anymore. The emptiness he left wasn't just his presence. It was what he'd awakened. I didn't want to be who I was before, but I also didn't know how to be this new version without him nearby. My father noticed the change. He didn't say it outright, but he increased invitations to prayer vigils, included me more in church events, and began citing more often in sermons the dangers of outside influences. I knew they were messages, that he'd sensed it, and more than that he feared losing me to something he couldn't control. But the truth was, I'd already crossed that line. Not out of rebellion, but out of awakening. I didn't want to live a faith that suffocated me instead of embracing me. I didn't want to keep pretending to be whole to uphold the image of a perfect daughter. The love I'd known, even briefly, even interrupted, taught me more about divine presence than any memorized verse. It was during this time that I started writing. At night, in the silence of my room, I took loose sheets and wrote everything I felt. Not to share with anyone, but to keep from going mad with what was piling up inside. I wrote about the kiss, about the light touch of hands, about how Noah spoke of the world without anger, even after being hurt so many times. I wrote about the fear of being alone in this feeling, and deep down, about the hope that he'd return. But he didn't. Weeks turned into a month, then 2. And by the 3rd, I started walking without expecting to find him. Not because the love had faded, but because something in me began to take root even without him. Then a letter arrived. No return address. Just my name handwritten on the envelope. Inside, a simple folded paper with a few lines. It was him. Saying he'd left because he was scared, not of me, but of what he felt by my side. That in all the roads he'd traveled, he'd never stopped, until me. And that now, he was trying to find a way to stay. I finished reading with trembling hands and a racing heart. The letter didn't say where he was or when he'd return, but it said something no one had ever dared say to me, that I was home. that he hadn't run because he didn't love me, but because he loved me too much, and he didn't know what to do with it. I tucked the letter between the pages of my Bible, not out of irony, but because for the first time there was something in there that made me feel alive. The letter stayed with me like a warm secret in my chest. I reread it in silence, almost afraid the words would vanish if spoken aloud. And with every reading, a part of me rebuilt itself. Not from certainty, but from knowing I hadn't imagined it alone, that what I felt wasn't madness, sin, or illusion. It was love. And he felt it too. But time, that cruel old teacher, kept moving. The town carried on with its unchanging routine. The services, the whispers, the Sunday lunches, the polite manners masking judgments. I was no longer seen with the same eyes. Even without saying anything, everyone seemed to know something had changed in me, and they were right. I didn't fit that old mold anymore. Not because I'd abandoned faith, but because I'd stopped being afraid. Then, on a mild autumn afternoon, he appeared. Like the first time, without fanfare. He just showed up. Road-worn, unshaven, backpack slung over his shoulder. But there was something different in his eyes. Not just weariness. It was resolve. And when our eyes met, the time that had separated us evaporated like it had never been. I didn't run. I didn't cry. I just walked to him and hugged him. It wasn't a cinematic reunion. It was real. The kind that carries pain, longing, and the weight of delayed choices. He didn't apologize. He just said, "This time I stayed." But the world doesn't bend with the same kindness. The news spread in hours. My father stayed silent for a whole day. On the second, he called me to talk. The tone was different. No more pleading, just authority. He demanded I end things with Noah, said I was putting my soul and the church's reputation at risk, that my behavior confused the youth, that I had to choose between faith and sin. And there, sitting across from the man who raised me, I realized he didn't see me. He never had. He saw the perfect daughter, the one who preached without faltering, memorized verses, embodied an immaculate faith. But he didn't know Abigail. Didn't know the pain I hid, the silence I swallowed for years, how hard I fought to keep earning a love that only came with conditions. And calmly I answered, "I've already made my choice, and it was for truth." There were no shouts, just the dry sound of disappointment settling like dust on the floor. I left with a heavy heart, but light. For the first time, I walked without chains. In town, opinions split. Some avoided me. Others, for the first time, looked at me with respect. Not for obedience, but for courage. Noah and I didn't make speeches or confront anyone. We just existed. And in that shared existence, we rebuilt our own foundations. At the end of that season, he took me to the old abandoned train station. Said he wanted to restore it, open a small coffee shop, set up a map studio. Maps he drew himself on lonely nights on the road. And he asked, in a low voice, not promising, the impossible but offering what he had, "Would you stay with me here?" I looked around and answered with what I now understood deeply. I never needed much space, just a place where I could be whole. Time passed, but not the way it used to, dragging unkept promises, repeating the same Sundays, the same gazes, the same fears disguised as routine. Now, every day tasted new. Even the quiet ones, even the hard ones. The train station transformed, slowly. We didn't announce it, didn't ask for help. We just started. We painted the walls with our own hands, sanded the old windows, cleaned every corner like we were cleansing the past. Noah drew maps at night, and I worked on simple recipes. for the coffee shop I dreamed of opening since I was a girl. It wasn't about profit. It was about belonging, about finally having a place that was ours, not inherited, but built. The town watched from a distance. Some began to approach slowly, curious, cautious, not for the novelty of the place, but because they saw something different. Two familiar faces, one who stayed, one who returned, living without asking permission. And somehow that made them think. People change, some in silence, others through scandal. My father, for instance, didn't speak to me for months. We'd cross paths at the market sometimes, and he'd look away as if I'd become a stranger to faith. But I didn't stop praying. I just learned to pray with paint-stained hands, hair hastily tied back, a heart at peace, even if full of questions. It was my mother who came first. She brought a cake, said she wasn't there to talk, just to see. But she sat for a whole hour, watching Noah fix a shelf with the patience of someone who'd had everything torn away. When she left, she folded the dish towel neatly on the counter. For me, that was enough. Over time, some of the town's youth started coming to the coffee shop, some to study, others to hear Noah's road stories, others just to sit and exist, in a place without judgment. Sometimes I'd look at that small room and see people who, like me, were tired of fitting molds, and I realized that without meaning to, we'd built a sanctuary, not of stone and sermons, but of listening and freedom. Noah and I didn't wear rings. We didn't need to. The life we chose to live together was our daily vow. He still walked, long stretches sometimes, said he needed the world's silence to sort out what he felt. But now, he always came back. And every time he did, he found me there, whole, steady, rooted in what we'd built. And on an ordinary afternoon, as we closed the coffee shop together and the light streamed softly through the windows, he looked at me like it was still the first time, and said, "If I ever get lost again, will you find me here?" I smiled, touched his face gently and answered, "You'll never be lost again, because now you know where home is." Years have passed since that first encounter that seemed so insignificant, and I still catch myself smiling alone when I think of how it all began. The pastor's daughter and the aimless wanderer. It seemed unlikely, and maybe it was, but true love doesn't need logic, only courage. The train station became more than a coffee shop. It became a meeting point for those who'd also lost themselves, trying to be what others expected. Noah still draws maps, and I still write on loose sheets I hide between books and recipes. Sometimes I find anonymous notes left on the tables, from people saying they found a piece of themselves here. My father now greets me with a discreet nod. There was never reconciliation in words, but there's silence without tension. And coming from him, that's almost forgiveness. I never imagined loving someone like Noah would lead me to find myself. But that's what true love does. It doesn't fill us. It reveals us. And if anyone ever asks who we were, I'll say with serenity, we're two opposite worlds who chose each other without needing to change who they were.